right, guys, we're back with another video, and I'm back with my good friend Paul again. And today we're going to talk about his book, The Nephilim Look Like Clowns. So go ahead, Paul, the mic is yours.
Yeah, well, obviously we just had a very brief talk before we started recording here, but I guess I'll just pick up from where we left off there, really. Um, it's a passion project of mine. It's the amalgamation of maybe 5 years worth of research, 6 years worth of I don't know, it's pushing now. The time just keeps going with this one. And it's got to the point where I've decided, you know what, it's time to compile this into something a bit more consistent, permanent, shall we say. Let's put ink to paper. And I have been writing this book now for 2 months. I am 20,000 words into it and 40 pages in, and I've only just about almost finished the first section of 10. So this is probably going to be a 500-page epic by the time I've finished. What we were talking about just before and what the first section is really all about is the historical basis for everything. So you want to talk about Nephilim looking like clowns. Well, first you have to know where Nephilim came from, just what they are exactly and how they came to be, the role they played in antediluvian history, so pre-flood history, the role all the other players involved in the creation of Nephilim played, so the rebellious angels and their take on everything and how they created the Nephilim, and obviously how their agenda as to why they even did that to begin with. And then they have the Cain's progeny, who created many cults in the antediluvian age who worked with the fallen angels. You know, it was the daughters of Cain who mated with these fallen angels to create the Nephilim to begin with. But that's it from the lineage of Cain. That's right. So, and this is the thing. I want to talk about the clowns in my book. That's what the book's about. You know, how are Nephilim related to the image of a clown in some way? But all I've done so far in 20,000 words is just try to make a Cliff Notes, highly summarized version of a lot of history people have written 1,000-page books about. But I'm trying to condense it into about 50 pages. So that's where I'm at currently with my
That's
book.
actually something I never thought about is what tribe or what people were the sinful women that mated with the angels? Where were they from? And that's a good point. They probably were from the lineage of Cain. When did you come to that conclusion?
Well, much of the earlier part of my book is based on the works of Gary Wayne. I don't know if you heard of Gary Wayne before.
Yep,
So,
Genesis 6 conspiracy, right?
absolutely. So, if I grab this here, a lot of that comes from this book.
Yep, that one, conspiracy.
The good thing about what Gary's done here, it's like an 800-page epic, but it's all broken down into every section of what happened at the flood, all the way to now, basically. Mm-hmm. And the brilliant thing is he's referenced all the authors I need to find to where he got his information from. So I can reference from what he said straight to where the source came from. And this is just a treasure trove of information, basically. But Gary Wayne is a contrarian Christian. He doesn't go with the mainstream churchianity view on the creation of Nephilim or what it means when it says the sons of God came unto the daughters of men. The mainstream understanding is, and that was just the sons of God references the righteous sons of Adam, so the sons of Seth. Obviously Abel was murdered by Cain, but then Seth went on to have his lineage all the way down to Noah, and it was the righteous sons mating with the rebellious sons of Cain's progeny, daughters of progeny, which created these giants. But that doesn't make any sense to me, and Gary Wayne has made it very clear in here that is just a naive view of things. If you want to go off the Bible alone, which is obviously nothing wrong with that in itself, but it's a biblical story. I think it does. I believe, and he's made it clear as well, and I make it clear in my book, it does make it clear that they are talking about angels mating with women. They're making that very clear in the Bible.
Even if you take the Bible alone without the Apocrypha, I think it does make it clear, because it literally describes these giants that came from the relationships of the fallen. Well, that doesn't say fallen beings. It just says Nephilim and the sons of God, right? It talks about them looking differently. 6 fingers, like 6 toes.
Absolutely.
Just gigantic. That can't be a normal human.
Well, that alone is evidence enough to me. I've never heard of 2 humans having sex and creating giants the size of cedar trees. That just doesn't happen, And then people argue, well, people were taller back then. And it's like, that's not going to cut it alone. No. That doesn't explain the terrible nature of these things, that, like I said, the deformities, the 6 fingers, 6 toes, the double sets of teeth. the porcelain white skin and the red hair and the just the pure strength of them as well, and the size of them and the fierceness. None of that is accounted for by just good people having sex with the daughters of bad people. I mean, it's a childish way of viewing things, in my opinion. And I based a lot of my early research in the book off Gary Wayne's research, and I think it's fantastic. He's the one who kind of really went with this idea that it was Cain's progeny through a need, I suppose, to go against God, just like the rebellious angels went against God. The kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of deal happened there, and the fallen angels, who you could argue had some play in the fall of Adam from the Garden of Eden to begin with. Lucifer's fall, he was jealous, he was angry that he would have to allow a human, an ape, a primate to be the king of earth, and the angels have to bow down to this primitive being type of attitude. And that's what got him kicked out of heaven, and Eden. And that's what made him make the serpent tempt Eve to get them kicked out of heaven as well, with the false promise of, you will be as gods. From there, it seems clear that Cain had a similar attitude to Lucifer in that respect. It's as though, why should I have followed the orders of you and give everything I worked hard for to you in the sacrifice type of attitude? And he was kicked out. Again, a form of exile, I suppose, from the family of Adam after murdering his brother.
What I'm looking into recently is in the beginning of Genesis, I think it's Genesis 3 or 4, it talks about the seed of the serpent having hostility towards the seed of Adam and Eve, right? And when I look this up, when I look up the basic modern church explanation for this, they allegorize everything. Everything's a metaphor basically, and that the serpent seed is talking about just sinful humans, basically, like atheists who don't want to obey God. But I was wondering, is it possible that Cain could be part of this serpent seed, or the seed of the serpent?
God said to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, I will put enmity between your seed and her seed as a punishment. And obviously he'll also crawl on his belly and all these type of things. I think the enmity is don't forget, the Bible is prophetic to the core. Everything it says is a prophecy about what is to come next, everything. And I think that promise was the seraphim class watcher angels, who are serpentine in nature. So the serpent and their kin are going to create a seed with human women. I think God foresaw that coming. He says, I know your plan. Basically, he was saying, I know your plan. I know where you're going with this, and I believe it was planned out well in advance. And I've got some stuff in the book about how this wasn't just a random occurrence where angels got horny and just decided to do something on a whim. This was well orchestrated and planned well in advance, and they knew full well what they were doing and what the consequences of their actions were going to be. So I do believe the whole enmity between your seed and her seed was God saying, you will attempt to do this, you will create your children, sure, your serpent seed, but they will perish, and the seed of man, the Son of Man, the prophesied in the coming of Jesus, will come, and it will put an end to this. It will crush it, and you will not be able to do what you're about to do again in the future, type of thing. I think that's all that was kind of alluding to. Cain is involved with this heavily. Like I said, I do believe Cain, when he was exiled, he went to the land of Nod, it's called, which tells me that it's an already well-established place on Earth. It has a name. It's called Nod. It's a city of some kind, or at least a village. It's got to be something where there are already people there. And a lot of this, like I said, what Gary Wayne is making a brand new book about, I believe, right now, but he touches on it in this. And I followed his work, and I tend to agree with him that they weren't the only humans on Earth. Adam were not the only humans created. It seems to be that if you follow Genesis, in Genesis 5, God says he creates man and woman together at once and tells them to go forth and multiply and subdue the earth. That's plural. Now, when he talks about the creation of Adam, he says he created Adam and then took him and put him in a garden. So completely two different stories there. Man and woman created together, told to go forth and multiply over the earth. Adam created over here, taken out of mankind and put in a separate place called the Garden of Eden. And it seems like Adam was chosen to kind of be groomed by God in the Garden of Eden, to be taught everything, prepared to be king and ruler over all of man. up until this point, so you talk about big time scales here. This didn't just happen within a year, or we're talking hundreds of years here. There were angels on the earth, Lucifer included, who were watching over these people, these humans, these first people that subdued the earth. So we're talking about big, like, if I was to hazard a guess, cultures like Aztec cultures, Mayan cultures, things like that. There's even a story in the Popol Vuh, which is of the Mayan, their own scripture, where they talk about a being very similar to Lucifer, who had a golden throne, who treated his subjects poorly. He gave them fire to keep them in line, type of thing. He was ordained in jewels, very proud. He has the same story as Lucifer. He got proud. He fought against God and was kicked off the giant tree and fallen to earth. And this is how could Lucifer be described, the exact same character, as ruling over a lot of people? I think these angels walked on earth and ruled over mankind at some point. And then Adam comes along, and all these angels who are ruling over man and considered themselves better than man, God's first best creations, saw that Adam is naming all the animals. Even they weren't given that honor, and they got jealous. And that's the start of the rebellion. That's what made Lucifer say, no, I will be as God. I am already treated like a god. I deserve to be like God. I'm not going to bow down to a man like at all. If anything, you should have chosen some serpent-like creature, not a primate. They got angry about this. And I believe that's why that's the whole agenda too, right? Well, we're going to destroy his precious Adam, corrupt him. We're going to corrupt all of his children and his children's children. We're going to manipulate all of God's creation through man. We're going to make them monsters like us. We're going to create the Nephilim. We're going to manipulate their genetics. We're going to create Nephil and Elio, which are angel mixed with animals, so chimera hybrids. We're going to create the Nephilim are going to have sex with animals and create their own offspring and their own, it's just going to become a mess, But to do that, they worked with Cain's side, because Cain had the same attitude. Like I said, the angels watched Cain murder Abel, and they said, this guy's on our side. So they came up to him with an offer, you have all this knowledge given to you from your father Adam, which he was given by God in the Garden of Eden. You have this power to create cities. You understand the 7 sacred sciences, masonry, geometry, everything like that. You have power over the people who are already here because you have all this knowledge. Cain was treated like a god. Cain was given a mark, to protect him. He says, you can't kick me out, God. I'll get killed. People will kill me. And he's like, no, they won't. I'll put this mark on you, and they'll know if they kill you, they will have a punishment 7 times worse. Who was he scared of exactly? If there was no one else there, it's these questions. You have to ask, like, who's going to kill him if literally, he's like the second born son of Adam, and they're supposedly the only people who exist. It's not the case. I think the whole the Old Testament is this, the antediluvian Old Testament anyway, pre-flood. It's just a tale of 2 competing bloodlines, Seth and Cain and their children. Cain's first child was Enoch, and now that Seth had a child called Enoch, but that was the 7th generation down, around the times of just after the time of Jared, the 6th generation. The first generation of Cain was Enoch, and he named the first city he built after his son
Enoch. Yeah.
Where did Cain get a wife to create Enoch?
That's true, but it also says that Adam and Eve, because people ask that question, where were the women? It just says Adam and Eve created Cain and Abel, right? But there's another verse that says they begot sons and daughters.
I'm sure they did, but even
it just doesn't talk about them as much.
Even if they vigorously, mated with each other, non-stop producing over and over, they still couldn't create enough people to build a city
in that time.
In just one generation. It's highly unlikely. And I think if you step out of a biblical perspective for 1 second and maybe examine Mesopotamian myths, antediluvian myths about the creation of mankind, they talk about, Enlil and Enki creating the black-headed people, which were many, and they were created as like a slave class. And it was those people that survived after the flood and also repopulated the earth. They didn't talk about creating one human being and then this the biblical perspective, it was a twisted story from the truth. Obviously, they kind of left Adam out of it,
All these stories they twist what the Bible talks.
Yeah, exactly. But they talk about many people being created all at once, and I do think in the beginning the angels may have played a larger role in the creation of a lot of things God was doing as kind of his aides, his helpers, in creating things. Which again is probably why they were furious. A good third of the angels, we created these things, and now we're supposed to bow down to them. It's
things we created.
Exactly.
It's the opposite, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to give sympathy for the devil, but I can understand the motivations from their perspective. I'm not saying they were correct in it, because all they did was cause suffering, pain, and chaos as a result of their actions. And God punished them accordingly. And you can read in the book of Enoch about that, and it was brutal. They even
regretted their decisions too. They said they couldn't even look up to the heavens because they were so ashamed, and they wanted Enoch to intercede for them, and Enoch tried, and God said, "Angels are supposed to intercede for man, not the other way around." The answer is no.
Yeah, exactly.
They were holy angels. They know more than man. They knew the truth. They knew what was going to happen, and they still did it, knowing this, which is why there's no chance for them to have any kind of salvation.
No. I mean, there were certain angels like Azazel or Samyaza who I think were probably the same angel. There's loads of debates about that. But it seems like if you want to go from the Book of the Giants, it's a slightly different angle. It goes that the Watchers requested to come down to earth to God to teach mankind how to be righteous. And God said, okay. So the Watchers came down. But it says Samyaza went first to prepare the way for the other angels before they arrived. What did he go down to earth to do exactly? Now, I'm theorizing here. This is me. I don't know if anyone's written about this. I don't think even Gary Wayne has written about this, but someone probably has somewhere. I doubt this is my idea, but it seems to me, based on the story I've kind of unfolded, Azazel is kind of like Lucifer's pal. Lucifer's already cast out of heaven by this point. He's already on earth doing his thing, Azazel came down to earth, I think, to communicate with Lucifer, to kind of plan ahead, to say, right, I convinced the guys to come down to earth, and we're going to get they believe they're coming down to make everyone righteous, and to teach mankind good things. That's kind of but we know what's really going on here. And I think the interesting thing is it's kind of explained in the Book of the Giants, and people's interpretation of that. Many cities were built by Cain in preparation for the Nephilim. So that means they knew angels were about to come down and create giants. And they already had the cities built, prepared for them from the descriptions. And it's kind of like this. That means this plan is well in the making, years before it even happened. And I do believe Cain, working with Lucifer, had developed this plan. Azazel, another one of the rebellious angels who probably was sympathetic to Lucifer but didn't rebel with him at the time. Do you get what I mean? Wanted to remain kind of out of it, but he did believe in Lucifer's cause, I think. So I think when he convinced the other angels and God to come down to earth, and then he came down first, I think that's where the plan was put into motion. And then the Watcher class angels came down to Mount Hermon with Azazel. And it says there's many angles to this. We don't know which is the true one. The first angle is Watchers saw the daughters of men and saw they were attractive, so just took wives of them. But then the other story is Azazel and Lucifer led the daughters of Cain up Mount Hermon wearing makeup adorned in jewelry and all dolled up, basically, to tempt the angels, and the angels fell for it. And that's why they were so regretful afterwards. It's kind of like we just gave into pleasure and our passions. Sorry, God, we're so sorry. And God was like, no, you knew the consequences of this. But I don't know what's true there, but these competing stories are kind of around. You've got to take some of the apocryphal texts and the Dead Sea Scrolls with a pinch of salt, because the Book of the Giants does contradict the Book of Enoch slightly in the interpretation. Not contradict, it's more they have their own story. Like I said, so the Book of Enoch says the angels came down and they said, I fear you're not going to do this with me. And they had that whole conversation happens with Azazel, but then they all agreed to make a pact and do it together. But then in the Book of Giants, it's a slightly different story where they were tempted to do it and they didn't really know what they were doing. So it's kind of like it's one interpretation over the other. I hazard to guess that it's probably somewhere in between.
It could be just from a different angle. It's the same exact story and it's just telling it from a different angle. So the fact that they have regrets probably shows that they didn't fully plan it. until they came down. They realized they're already getting tempted, so let's make the pact anyway. And they did it, and then they realized
something like that, yeah.
Yeah,
but I think Azazel, the name Azazel, it means scapegoat, from what I understand.
Yeah.
And I think his real name is Samyaza, and I think he took the blame for everything. Basically, this was Lucifer's plan from the beginning, but Azazel, the scapegoat, took the whole thing on him, and the whole Book of Enoch is about what Azazel has done to the earth, and he was punished drastically. He was the first one to be taken down, and then the rest of the angels had to watch as their children slaughtered each other, and then turned against them and tried to slaughter them.
They loved their children too. They genuinely had love for their kids, for the Nephilim, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, and in the Book of Giants, there are some Nephilim who supposedly were good. I don't know about that. I'm not sure. There's something weird about the Book of Giants where it tries to give you that whole there are good giants and bad giants type of angle. And I know the world is nuanced to like that, and maybe 1 in a million had a heart of goodness, but and it's kind of like, but it seems like from the description of Nephilim everywhere else, they were corrupt to the core.
Mm-hmm.
They were truly a corrupted thing. They were never supposed to exist to begin with. I don't think they had the ability to house anything close to a Holy Spirit or a soul as we know it.
Compass, anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So I think it was a truly corrupted entity from the start, and then their children and their children's children are something else. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, my bad. Go ahead. Finish.
I was considering this again because, like I said, I've just been swimming in history like 2 months basically, and one thing I found out which really fascinated me the most is what exactly happened to the women who gave birth to these Nephilim, the humans, and it says in the Book of Enoch that they became sirens.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I didn't know this. I was ignorant to this until doing the research. I hadn't really gotten that deep into it. But now I'm looking into it, and it's kind of like, wow. You look into the history of sirens in Greek mythology and everything, and there's so much there that kind of hints like, of course, that's where the women went. And I don't know exactly what it meant when it said in Enoch, they became sirens. Now, that can mean two things. That can mean they were punished for their actions and turned into sirens by God. But I think more likely is they were rewarded by the angels for their part in this and given the extended life that comes with being a siren, being half divine, the power, the strength, the ability to defend yourself against cruel men in a world of corruption by being fierce monsters, I think they took that gift with open arms after giving birth to the giants. And that was kind of their reward, because there's the stories of a particular siren, they could call it. It's called Echidna in Greek mythology. And Echidna is said to be the creation or the lover of a Titan god of thunder. And they together created so many offspring, which were monsters, hideous monsters, the most famous of the Greek monsters. So, the Hydra with the many heads, you cut one head off, another one sprouts. Cerberus, the hound of hell who guards Hades. The Sphinx, the Chimera. They created, if you can think of an ancient Greek monster, it was Echidna mating with this Titan that created them all. And she was said to be put in like a golden dwelling somewhere, safe by the gods. She was precious to the gods. She was considered a wonderful thing and put in a wonderful place of beauty and gold, safe away from any harm, so she could keep producing for them.
Mm.
And she was described as having a woman body on the top half, but two serpent legs, 2 legs like snake, which is the Starbucks logo. Yeah, that's another example of it, But that is a siren. That's what sirens are. Yeah. They were mermaids, or they were half women, half bird. Is another example in really early Greek depictions and pottery.
They have a lot of those. The siren is the half woman. Yeah, it's interesting.
That's it. And just off the cuff today, I was doing research on flood myths, and there's one particular story from Ecuador which I found really interesting on this matter. And basically the story goes, the flood myth is that two brothers survived the flood by climbing to the top of a really tall mountain.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed up there for a week before the waters came down. But they were worried they were going to die of starvation and thirst. But they found a cave in the mountain, and every time they came back to the cave, there was provisions there waiting for them. And they kept going back, and the food was always there. Then when the flood went away, they found out that it was these two bird women who were leaving food for them on this high mountain. Yeah, this is the macaws, they were called. Look up Ecuadorian flood myth, and this whole story will come up.
Yeah.
Anyway, it said that the men fell in love with these beautiful bird women. They had a woman's body but a bird's head. So consider like Egyptian gods are always depicted as having an animal-like head, for example. It says that they basically mated with each other and created the population of Ecuador that are there today after the flood. So what we have there is an incursion straight after the flood of sirens having sex with humans to create the population of that area, to repopulate that specific area. And I just, again, I would never have considered that as an important story if I hadn't already interpreted what Enoch said about these women becoming sirens. And it would explain how after the flood, Nephilim appeared again. If we have these women who can fly, well, they're not on the face of the earth. They weren't wiped out by a flood on the face of the earth. They were in the sky flying, you know. They have these
sirens in the seas, right? You can't kill a Nephilim in the ocean or in
no,
the sea.
exactly. You can't kill a fish in the ocean, you know, which is what they are. You know, it's fascinating stuff.
And that reminds me of Jesus's miracle that he did. One of his most famous ones was to walk on water. And everything Jesus did had a meaning and purpose behind it. Back in the Bible days, the early church believed that spirits often came from the seas because that's how the Nephilim died, right? Because of the flood. Mm-hmm. So Jesus walking on water was to show the spirits that he has dominion over them. So it was like a symbolic way of saying, I have power over the scorpions, over the serpents, over the demons, and I give you that same power as well.
Absolutely. No,
very interesting. I believe when Jesus first walked on water, the disciples were kind of scared and they thought it was a spirit. There's even a verse like that. And I'm like, wow, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many stories. I remember my early days of this when I first started reading the book and getting into this whole Nephilim stuff. There's a story, I think it's in India, some peninsula somewhere, where this woman beast would appear as a beautiful woman and lure men into the sea. But to do that first, she would leave gold on the shore and the men would come and collect the gold, and then she would appear and they would think she was beautiful, and then they'd come into the sea and she'd basically mate with them, and then take them back to the land. But she only appeared as a beautiful woman during the full moon or something. Every other time she was a fish woman, basically. She was a mermaid. She had a fish body, you know. So that's a modern example of a myth of a siren, a half woman, half animal hybrid, luring men to mate with them to create more Nephilim, essentially, to keep producing these things. And obviously, in the Greek pantheon, sirens are not gods, but they are allowed to come to the meetings of the gods. They were considered worthy enough to be a part of the conversation on Mount Olympus and all that sort of stuff. But they were not considered gods themselves, but the gods respected them enough to allow them in on the conversation. That sounds to me like fallen angels, rebellious angels, conspiratory, having a conspiracy with a particular set of human women to keep producing a specific outcome. It's just you have this pantheistic pagan description of it, which matches perfectly with the biblical perspective when you actually understand that it's not a good thing. It was a corruption. It's not that these sirens were glorious beings worthy of the god's attention. It's that they were corrupt humans working with fallen angels to further corrupt God's creation.
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
There's also
the book's going well, is what I'm trying to say.
It's good. Sounds interesting. I can't wait to get it. But the one thing I also wanted to ask, I heard that there are two theories for how the Nephilim survived. The one you mentioned was actually a new one I've never heard before, but it makes a lot of sense. The second one is that the Nephilim had their own art. Because remember in the book of the giants, they were given visions, or the gods gave them visions about a coming flood that was going to destroy them, right? And if
absolutely,
the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh was known to be 2/3 God, I believe, which is 2/3 fallen angel, basically. So he was extra divine compared to just a Nephilim. And they often compare the book of Gilgamesh to the flood story, and they say that Gilgamesh or Enki is like a Noah type character, right? But my theory is that it's a completely separate arc. In fact, it even looks different. It says that it was more square shaped. And what if they got their hybrid abomination animals on that arc along with Nephilim, and that's how some of them survived? Or maybe the story that you just told me along with that could be both true.
I think from what I've just researched today into this, and the past couple of days, I've been looking at all the flood myths around the world. And the problem is there is literally like 900 flood myths. Every tribe in every country within every continent has their own myth. If you go, I'm talking about folk traditional tribes here, but I did write a few passages today specifically about the Mesopotamian views. I've actually just been discussing in my own book a lot about, like I said, flood myths and Mesopotamian flood myths, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which you mentioned earlier. It's something that I've written a few words on, so I may as well just read what I've written rather than me try and ramble on about it from the top of my head, to be honest. So let me just quickly get this up, and then I'll have a quick, because a lot of what you were saying is true, and I think it gets explained in here. So just bear with me 1 second. This is a quote from Gary Wayne, first of all. So this epoch was steeped in corruption, idolatry, mysticism, and pantheism. Mysticism was created by the posterity of Cain through the sponsorship of fallen angels, and it was passed on to the Nephilim to terrorize humankind of that epoch. Cainites, mysticism, and the Nephilim were the three-part axis of evil, sponsored by fallen angels. This ancient axis of evil brought the antediluvian age to its knees through rebellion, which ultimately brought the deluge upon the cryptic civilization. So I go on to say, with all that said and the context given in the previous chapters of this section, it really isn't surprising to me from a moral standpoint that the flood happened. The story of Noah and the flood is often considered a biblical fairy tale by argumentative types, used as a point of ridicule by secular detractors because of the miraculous nature of the ark. However, the story of a huge, all-encompassing deluge is a worldwide phenomenon and not only a biblical concept. Examples of flood myths with survivors building a large boat can be found within the oral written traditions of cultures on every continent, each having their own heroic flair and culturally significant nuances that veer away from the biblical story. Yet there are also numerous undeniable similarities to these folkish tales and the story found in Genesis too. One of the most famous and perhaps earliest documented flood stories comes from one of the 5,000-year-old Sumerian tablet fragments that detail the Epic of Gilgamesh. Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the world's leading Assyriologists and an expert on Sumerian history and Sumerian language, he wrote this when discussing the flood myth of Babylon and Sumer, that the biblical deluge story is not original to the Hebrew redactors of the Bible has been known now for more than half a century. From the time of the discovery of the decipherment of the 11th tablet of the Semitic Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian deluge myth itself, however, is of Sumerian origin. The carefully translated fragment consisting of the lower third of the sixth column of the Sumerian tablet in the Nippur collection of the University Museum, the larger part of those contents is devoted to the deluge myth. Unfortunately, this fragment still remains unique and unduplicated. The flood was decreed to wipe out man, but at least some of the gods seem to regret this decision. It was probably the water god Enki, however, who contrived to save mankind. He informed, so this is their version of Noah, Zeusudra. So Zeusudra, that's how you pronounce it. He informed Zeusudra, the Sumerian counterpart of the biblical Noah, a pious, God-fearing, humble king, of the dreadful decision of the gods and advised him to save himself by building a very large boat. The long passage giving the details of the construction of the boat is destroyed. When our text begins again, it's in the midst of describing the flood. So just stopping there, this historian obviously interprets it from a secular perspective, and he describes Zeusudra as basically being Noah, but he also described as being a king of sorts. Now, Noah wasn't a king. Okay, this is not talking about Noah. This isn't an analog. This isn't the same story as Noah. And it can be told through the differences, basically. So if we go on to describe this, so I'd say the historian, though translated the tablets, has interpreted it through a secular lens. He says, flood myth with a big boat, it's just the Noah's Ark story. That's all it is. And that's not what's going on here. And I think Gary emphasizes this point, but I go on to make a few of my own points here. So this myth shares so many similarities with the biblical account of the flood, including a warning from heaven to a single man who then builds a boat to survive the flood and save animals to repopulate the earth. However, in this version, a king was saved by Enki, the water god, a possible analogue of the Greek Poseidon. Therefore, a watcher angel? Question there. When he was made immortal by the gods Enlil and An after the flood as a reward for saving humanity. Now, Noah doesn't get made immortal after the flood, as far as we're aware. I think he lives for another 600 or so years, about 900 years in total. 300 years before the flood, about 600 years after the flood, something like that. Mm-hmm. But maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's 600 years, the 300, maybe I'm forgetting here off the top of my head. But this character is rewarded by many gods after the flood and warned by a particular lower class god of the pantheon, Enki, a water god. The Noah's story is completely different from that. So I go on to say here, the later Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh has a slightly different take on the story, as Enlil was the one who caused the flood. Apparently, humanity was so overpopulated and loud that it kept the god Enlil from sleeping. Unable to get his nap, in perhaps one of the most pathetic overreactions to such a trivial issue, he sent a flood to wipe out all life on the face of the earth.
So that's their excuse for why
that's their story for why the flood happened. You were so loud I couldn't get my nap, so I killed you all. Right? That's literally the story from the Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, their flood version. Now that's not the God of the Bible.
Oh.
So how this historian can try and say it's simply just a Noah myth is it's
not.
Well, it's deceptive at the worst, just ignorant at best. I don't know. But this is basically what everyone always says about these particular flood myths. Oh, it's just talk about the same thing. And basically what they try and do then is say the Noah's Ark story is just a copy of these original stories. Yeah. And that's not the case. It's the other way around. These are these are the bastardized versions of the true story of Noah's Ark, and also parallel stories of different entities being saved by boats, warned by angels who knew the flood was coming. And this is where it gets really interesting. So a lot of this is to do with Gary Wayne's research as well, but it's obvious when you actually look into it. But
so it's the same flood. It's the same exact flood, but it's different characters and different
characters, different entities being saved through different means.
The similarities between Noah's flood and the Mesopotamian version or the Epic of Gilgamesh, and it shows similarities except for the boat, the name of the gods, and the person getting saved. And I also believe that the animals on their ark could have been the abominations, all these chimera hybrid creatures that they took with them that you also see in books and stories during medieval times and Greek times, times after the flood, after the deluge, basically. So
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, don't forget, Noah may have been mocked by humans who were fooled by the serpent cults and the many gods they worshipped, into thinking Noah's foolish, there's no such thing as a flood coming. But the gods knew. Mm-hmm. They knew it was real. They knew it was coming. They also had time to prepare. They're not stupid. They know God. They know who he is and what he's... But they would never let their underlings know that the flood is real and it's coming and they're frauds. Of course they wouldn't. But but they did select one particular king called Zuazudra. Mm-hmm. And as I explained earlier in my book, and how I think people should understand, is the kings of that time were Nephilim. They were put into positions of rulership. Mm-hmm. And Zuazudra was just a Nephilim king. That's all he was. And he was chosen to be saved by the fallen angel and the Watcher Angel class to carry on the corruption after the flood. That's basically all it was. And there's many people who basically say, this king is basically, this Gilgamesh is basically Nimrod. Or I've heard that discussion from maybe Rob Skiba, but I'm not sure on all that. I'll have to do a bit more research yet before I can clarify all this. But there does seem to be a character called Gilgamesh, or Zuizudra, or many names, who survives the flood during the Mesopotamian era and then rules as a king after the flood over a certain type of people. And then we have obviously the Tower of Babel situation. They all speak as one language, having one set of mind or one agenda to build a tower to heaven, and then an end is put to that, and they're scattered. So that scattering can probably explain all the similar flood myths all around the earth, all just with different names and different interpretations, because they were coming from a group of peoples who were once in one place, all sharing the same stories, And it's you find all around the earth, there's two types of flood myth. There's a flood myth which basically goes by the Noah's interpretation, where God was angry with mankind, so saved Noah on a boat, and he then repopulated the earth. And then there's the gods got angry for one particular reason, and then decided to wipe everyone out. But one of the gods decided to try and save humanity, and it's just basically a pantheon of gods saving kings, or an angry singular god destroying the earth because everyone got corrupt. You know what I mean? So one blames the anger of a god, which is the pantheon versions. They always blame a god getting angry over something silly, like the story of I can't get my nap because you're all too loud. And then you have the other story where humanity was corrupt and it had to be reset. There's always two, and it seems like all the world flood myths all have one of those angles. So, there was the people who saw what really happened, which is the flood was because humans were awful and everything was corrupt. And then there's the other side where the gods got angry, for their own reasons, or jealous or something silly, But I go on to say in here, hang on, so the Babylonian version of Enki in this version was called Ea, which I guess is like the Earth God or something. Ea is what its name is. Apparently, he warns a hero called Upnapishtim of a coming flood, who survived also using a boat. And in this story, the goddess Ishtar then turns up after the flood and says, Enlil will never do this again. And that was a promise made in Noah's story, wasn't it? I'll never flood the earth ever again with a rainbow. But the rainbow's not mentioned in this version. And then it says, after Enlil found out that there was still life after the flood he sent for not getting his nap, he was furious. But his son, Ninurta, defended humanity and convinced him to use famines and wild animals to keep humanity's population down instead of flooding them. And that's the end of the story. Enlil agrees. Right, so it's a horrible story from that perspective. It's like this stupid, bitter, pathetic god got angry because he couldn't get his nap and he was sleepy, wiped out all of humanity, got upset and really angry when he saw that they weren't all dead, right? And then his son steps in and goes, whoa, dad, how about we just torture them with famines and wild animals to keep the population down from now on? And he's like, yeah, I can agree with that. And that's the story. And for some reason, these people worshipped these gods. You know what I mean?
Yeah, they're like, that makes sense. Yeah, totally.
And these gods had nothing. They saw humans as playthings.
Yeah, these fallen angels, complete frauds. That's what they are.
Exactly. And it's a famous saying in Greek mythology that the human beings are just the playthings of the gods. That's all God saw them as, and it's terrifying. But it says here, Upnapishtim was the quintessential Nephilim. Okay. He was a tyrannical, evil potentate, just like Gilgamesh. Once more, the Mesopotamian flood narratives were not the source documents for the biblical floods. They were merely parallel legends recanting and detailing in mythology for the future generations the survival stories of the Nephilim from the deluge. That's all they were. So this description of Elendil makes him seem like a petty tyrant, basically. But it says here, this is Gary Wayne's research. This is quite interesting. Zuizudra or Upnapishtim, so two stories, Sumerian and Akkadian, both the same story, same character, different name. This person who was saved, according to the Mesopotamian stories, he was listed as the 10th king in the antediluvian Larsa list of kings. This is also known as the list of the Sumerian kings. Okay, so he was the 10th king of the antediluvian age of a particular city called Larsa. That's not Noah. Well, this is a person who is literally documented in writing as existing, you know. And I've already shown that antediluvian kings were all Nephilim by the final generation before the flood. You know, and I imagine this ancient retelling of the flood was really created by rebellious angels themselves in order to discredit God and maintain mankind's worship after the flood.
Yeah, to discredit his wrath, because if people knew that God was the one who sent the flood and that he has power over all the angels and he can literally destroy the whole place, people would realize you guys are frauds and there's one creator and he's the one who sent this. But they decided to make up a story like we got to make up something. So they think we sent it for some ridiculous reason. And they're like, oh, yeah, okay, we trust you, gods. You know, you haven't failed us yet. Right. So that's where the trust comes from.
But the thing is, like, I go on here in the book, I'm not going to do it now, but like in Aztec mythology, Cox was the only male survivor of the flood with his wife. They took refuge in a hollow trunk of a cypress tree. In another Mesoamerican story, the Nahua god, Tezcatlipoca, spoke of a man named Nata and his wife Nana, saying, do not busy yourselves any longer making pulque, but hollow out for yourselves a large boat of a cypress tree. That's another similar story in a different tribe somewhere else in South America. In the Incas' account, a supreme being and creator god, Kontiki, first created a race of giants, but they were unruly, so he destroyed them with a mighty flood and turned them to stone. Following the deluge, he created human beings from smaller stones. So everyone has this weird story. Like it echoes everything we've read, and that's just South America. You know, you go to North America, and they have their own orally shared traditions, which often involve a foolish protagonist and some kind of anthropomorphic nature god, like an eagle of some kind, or some kind of trickster god who angers an animal who then creates a flood of some kind. Like they have their own metaphorical, allegorical way of discussing the flood myth using animals and symbols and things like that. Yeah. But it's every culture around the world. I'm talking every single continent. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go to Australia, you can go to Europe, you can go to Africa, you can go to Asia, you can go to Greenland, you can go to North America, Mesoamerica, Central Americas, all the random islands of the Polynesians and, and the ones off in the middle of the Pacific. Every tribe has their own story.
It happened, yeah.
And it's undeniable. The whole flood aspect is just undeniable. And I'm trying to write this chapter, and I'm like 5 pages into the flood chapter now, and it's like, where do I stop? At what point do I need to stop where I've made my point with this one? Right? Because this is supposed to be a book about how the Nephilim look like clowns, and right now I've written a historical account of the antediluvian age. You know what I mean? And
I mean, maybe it's God telling you to make this clear for the reader. You know, maybe a lot of people know this stuff, right? They assume that only the Bible talks about the flood, but maybe this will help more people understand, people who don't believe in God and Jesus Christ, that what the scriptures is saying is true, and this is echoed throughout many cultures.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I've referenced the Bible a lot and the Book of Enoch and all the apocryphal texts. Yeah. But right now, I've been referencing historians, and no one denies the flood happened. No, I don't know why. You know, it's too. You can't ask for more evidence if you're a scientist or an archaeologist. Or
at this point, why deny? You know what are you doing by denying?
All they can do now is try and use these to discredit that the Bible is true. Yes. So now what they do is they lump the biblical story in with all of these stories now and say it's just another flood myth, just like the rest. And who's to say the biblical perspective is the right one? You know, they try and do that. But again, with there's some subtle, like, nuance. If you just look carefully, you can see that the Noah one, the biblical one, is different. It's similar in aesthetics because everyone experienced the same thing and boats were involved. but the specific reasonings for the flood is highly detailed and specific for the Noah account.
The most unique story out of all of them, too.
The most unique, and it's the base that every other myth is based on. You know what I mean? It's there, and it's just fascinating. But once I've finished, I have one more chapter after this, and it's called Demons, which then explains why we have demons because of all this stuff I've just explained. Right?
You haven't even got to that part. You're just 40 pages in, just explaining the whole origin story.
Yeah, but once I've boxed off this flood bit, I've done everything from the start to the flood then, and then this last chapter for this first section of the book, the last chapter is demons, and it basically, now I can then explain this is why we have demons, because the Nephilim happened and the flood happened and they became disembodied, and now we have non-physical entities, spirits still on the earth, called demons, and they are the disembodied spirits of the net. I can finally make that chapter, and then I'm ready to go on to clowns. That's the next section is descriptions of angels and Nephilim, and I'm going to go through all the accounts I can, which show that these entities look like serpents, and feathered and amphibious in nature. The angels specifically,
serpent smiles,
exactly. And how the Nephilim would have had features like their parents and all that sort of thing, and how we have modern, like the Giants of Kandahar accounts, if you want to go off that one from Iran, you know what I mean, which attacked the soldiers. That was white skin with red hair. You have the Testament of Amran, which talks about having the face of a viper and an adder and all that sort of thing. I think you made a video about that yourself. And the Dead Sea Scrolls descriptions. You've got descriptions of Noah when he was born, and there's loads of stuff you can go into. You've got the feathered serpents of Quetzalcoatl in North Americas. You've got descriptions of tribal giants that the North American tribes had to deal with. The ones they burnt out in a cave. They also had white skin, long red hair, big jaws, and had cackling howls. They were horrific to look at. They were cannibals, all this sort of thing. You know, you got European wild men or wildermen. Their descriptions of the same thing: tall, white-skinned, red-haired, slightly hairy creatures. You know what I mean? And
Bigfoot type.
Yeah, all over the earth. You got these descriptions of what the Nephilim and the angels look like. But I'm keeping this chapter mainly within the apocryphal text and the biblical text, only veering away a little bit. Probably use some of the Greek accounts as well. But then the next chapter after that is basically clowns. How are clowns relating to giants? And then I go through white skin. Clowns use white makeup. Red nose was probably a literal feature on many of these creatures. They had red noses because of the psychedelic nature of the serpent skin and the patterns, polka dots included. But also it's metaphorical for the blood around the mouth and in the nose as they were eating flesh all the time. You got the wide red mouth, which implies a wide jaw like that of a serpent, a big wide grin. Large shoes, ties, gloves, and jackets implies that they had large clothing because they were giants. It's a metaphor for that symbol again. Small cars, small umbrellas, small hats. Even the umbrella alone could be a reference to the flood if you want to go that far. But the fact that they are tiny to the clown implies that the clown is huge, and this ordinary sized umbrella is a little thing to them. You know what I mean? That's kind of the hint to them being giants again. Stilts, often see clowns wearing stilts is an allusion to them being very tall when they were on the earth, realistically. The neck ruffle, which you see clowns wearing, is the reptilian frill. It's a very specific reptilian feature in animals. Having a frill around the neck of skin, that is a reptilian feature. So I think it's a link again to the reptilian features the Nephilim would have had from their parents, who looked like vipers and adders. The colourful patterned clothing with polka dots and psychedelic patterns and multicolours is again a reference to the psychedelic nature of amphibians, reptiles, and birds, which are all angelic features. You know, what is a winged reptile is an angel. You know, a feathered winged snake thing is a bird reptile mix. I think the angels were amalgamations of many animalistic features rather than just human-like as we know it, you know, and their offspring had the same thing. Yeah. So even like the polka dot pattern, which seems foolish and silly to us, you see African tribes using polka dots as a specific feature in the garb they wear during the invocation rituals and the dances. Why polka dots in the West seem like a funny, cheesy thing, but it's a serious stylistic choice for cults and folk traditions around the world who worship ancestor spirits.
It's very sacred.
It's not.
Yeah.
And again, what else have we got? We got the crosses on the eyes, which could symbolize that they are now dead. They are dead spirits, but also that they had serpent-slit eyes in some way. The horn that you see clowns have, a joke to us, the honk honk thing, but in many other cultures, bells and horns and whistles go with their spiritual garb they were to represent spirits. They use sound and the bells clanging during their dances to attract spirits. That's the whole point of it, in order to then scare them away with the outfits they're wearing. And sound is inexplicably linked with demons. Frequency, vibration, and sound is of the domain of their realm. They don't have a body. They are nothing but entities of sound, spirit, and frequency. So when you see this horn, it's kind of a wink to sound and the clowns and the Nephilim themselves. I think it's interesting that a lot of them are mute. They don't speak, which could be a symbol again that they can no longer communicate with mankind in traditional means, because they don't have a mouth or lungs or a means to create sounds with their mouth anymore. They are disembodied spirits,
Mime, right? When they, go like that.
Exactly. And again, a mime is a black and white entity with fractal skin trapped in a prison, a matrix cube box thing, which is exactly where they are right now, in a sense. They're trapped. They're trapped in a veil they can't pierce, and no one can hear them. That's essentially the demon's situation, isn't it?
The Bible talks about this place. It calls it the dry places or the high places. So it's like another spiritual realm parallel to our world. And
that's right.
I explained it in another video that dry places is a word for a place that's depraved. They hunger, they thirst, but they can't satisfy that hunger and thirst. So it's a place you don't want to be in. Basically, it's a pit, right? It's like a bottomless pit.
Absolutely, yeah. I think in the Book of Enoch it says, the spirits will hunger but not be able to satisfy the hunger anymore. Like, but they'll be hungry forever. You know what I mean? Like, they will desire to fulfill the needs of the flesh and have no flesh to fulfill those desires. Because it's kind of the hell they're in, And it's interesting because in Japan, I haven't mentioned this in the book yet, but I just off my head I remember this. They have a particular type of spirit which they leave food out for, because they are these hungry spirits that just hunger incessantly. And they're depicted as having very large bellies and very thin skeleton-like bodies, because the bellies are expanded from starvation, and they're a particular class of spirit, and the ritual is to leave food out for them so they'll be at peace or something. I don't know. It's all just Nephilim worship to me now when I look at it. But no, they know of this ghost-like figure which is constantly hungry. That's the point I'm making there. They have their own version of what we're describing here, which is written in the Book of Enoch. The same thing, Going on to jesters, you have jester hats or horns, basically. Jester bells is the same thing. The jingling of the bells, the frequency of the sound, that's what these entities play with now. That's all they've got, energy and frequency. The jester clothing is the same thing, fractal matrix-like prison. And the circus as a thing is the fractal matrix prison the clowns are within. The jesters and jokers are within, where they perform and dance. That's where they are, this colourful, strange, psychedelic place, this huge tent, this dwelling, this trap, this prison. But also, I think it's interesting, I've done a lot of research recently into the Ringling Brothers, which were basically the first official circus of America as we know it, like a circus tent. They were kind of the inventors of that. They're the ones who created the very first clown troupes that performed in these circus tents that traveled all around America, the Ringling Bros of Florida. Now, the first clown image as we know it was created by Pagliacci. I think that's how you say, Pagliacci. Joe Pagliacci.
17th century, right?
Something like that. It was more like early 18, you know what I mean, 1800s. And he kind of created that image of the white face with the multicolored fractal clothing type clown that we know of. It has its roots in obviously the jesters and things of the past, of the king's courts and so forth. But he's the one who created that kind of image. And there's even Freemason lodges named after him. He's an important guy. You know what I mean? And his father was a famous acrobat as well. and he walked in very influential circles, with judges and rulers, and you know what I mean, and aristocrats of the day. And so did his son, basically, Pagliacci. So these weren't like just nobodies; they were influential characters and people. So I would hazard a guess that they were probably members of secret societies or influential orders of some kind. And someone sent me a book, and it's interesting that it goes into how all the Ringling brothers who created the Ringling Circus were all Freemasons. Every last one of them, all 7 brothers. And so it goes on to explain how they created these shows dedicated to Solomon in some of the acts. And Solomon with the Queen,
right, from the Bible.
That's right, King Solomon with the Queen of Sheba. And Solomon and his temple is a huge Freemason subject. They're obsessed with recreating the Temple of Solomon.
The pillars and everything,
yeah. So when you see that this troupe of Freemasons created the circus and the clowns, and then put on shows where they would make shows about King Solomon, the king who was known to have demons under his power, you know what I mean? Reenacts
to have community.
These biblical stories involving demons, specifically with clowns involved, and the initiates would go and watch these shows and see their rituals from their secret societies acted out in a grand scale, at a circus. And this is where the roots come from. We have this description of a clown I just gave you with all these features, and its roots are in Freemasonry, and Freemasons are basically just a continuation of the antediluvian serpent cults who worship the Nephilim. They're no different. So I don't think it's a coincidence we have a clown in the West now synonymous with circuses to us, but to the initiated who created them, it's a perfect representation of their gods, the Nephilim.
Yeah,
the source is there. It comes from these secret societies, and that's why we have a clown. The clown isn't just something that happened randomly. It was designed. It's a specific representation of the Nephilim spirits these secret societies work with, and evoke and get deals with, and they're in cahoots with the Luciferian agenda. They're all working together, from the spiritual realm to the physical realm. They have these Freemasons, the Shriners, all these secret societies are just foot soldiers for the demons and for the angels,
Yeah.
And they have created what we call a clown to us, which is just a silly honk juggler of some kind. But if you know what it is, and this history I'm trying to lay out here, it's kind of, no, this is a symbol for their gods, and it's dark in origin. It's truly dark, and they present it to the children. You know what I mean? That's
something playful, right, and cute and funny and goofy, and
exactly
something that's not dangerous or not spiritually dangerous.
Yeah. And with the way the world views it now, clowns are synonymous with evil now. I think this is kind of the revelation of the method. The whole 2016 clown sightings and that sort of stuff. It's all orchestrated to get us mentally prepared for the reality of the situation. So I think there's going to come a point where these disembodied spirits that have clownish features, jester-like creatures, are going to start to manifest physically somehow. I don't know how. There's many theories on how that's going to happen. But there's some kind of mind game going on right now to do with the
Killer Clowns from Outer Space. You ever seen that movie? I think it's
I've seen clips. Really... I've seen clips of it. Yeah, I think it's there's an interesting quote from the director of that. Someone asked him, like, why do they look like clowns, or something like that, and he says, no, clowns look like them. And that's basically my entire theory. You know what I mean? Like,
told us straight up.
The clown is a representation of the real thing, which is the Nephilim, or in that film's case, aliens. You know what I mean? That's always that. That's the new age way of saying it. Are there aliens from outer space rather than demons from another dimension? It's just the way they describe them, isn't it?
The last point I really wanted to drive is, if believers understood, the concept of Nephilim, because many people think this is not important, it opens up a whole new door of understanding Scripture. Why God was so ruthless in the Old Testament. If you understand, like, there's stories in the Bible where God tells the Israelites to kill, I believe it was in the land of Canaan, right? To kill the men, women, children, and the animals. And a lot of atheists use this story to show us as believers, look how cruel your God is. But if you understand Nephilim, you would know they weren't even human. They were the sons or the descendants of Anak or Anakim, which was a Nephilim, which was, they were these hybrid beings, basically. And God said, wipe them out. And the early church knew about the Nephilim. The modern one doesn't know much about it. which is why
No.
even to us, a lot of Christians are all like, well, these stories do seem kind of cruel. How could God just tell the Israelites to not even spare the babies, right? Not spare the children. But now it makes perfect sense and opens up new doors of understanding.
I agree. No, I completely agree. It was a huge contention for me when I was growing up as an atheist. How could God be such a cruel, evil person? Bad things happen, therefore, how can there be a God attitude? And that's just silly, you know what I mean? But now all this information has certainly solidified my faith.
Same way. It makes sense. Everything makes sense.
Yeah, and obviously it's led to many of the discoveries of my own research here. But like I said, earlier, that one story from Ecuador, that area was repopulated by bird hybrids mixing with humans, specifically saying, these aren't humans that were created here. And I think, God went to all the trouble to try and wipe out the big ones with the flood, right? But there were still these little things seeping through the cracks just after the flood immediately that kind of snuck their way past. And the whole point of that, pretty much the first half of like I said, the Bible, the Old Testament, is wiping out the remainders of this.
Yes.
And you read Genesis, and it seems just so quick and glances over it so quickly. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore offspring.
The end.
Yeah. They became mighty men of renown. Then it just jumps to the flood. Do you know what I mean?
Because all this information is in the Apocrypha, which the
this is what I mean. It seemed like it was written in a way where it was already assumed everybody knew this stuff. Everyone already understood there were giants and what the Nephilim did.
So, because it's written to them, it's not written to us, right? But the church doesn't understand the concept of Nephilim. They don't read these books that the early church had on hand, like the Book of Enoch, like the Book of Jubilees and Jasher and all the other books, right?
Yeah. So it was well known. It was well known. It's like, why we don't have to go into that. Yeah. It's like, you don't have to go. We already know. We already know about the Nephilim. Let's just quickly get on with the flood.
Yeah.
But we didn't in the modern day. Like I said, we don't. And it's now that the apocryphal texts are back to us, there's a lot of people out there try to discredit it and say, no, it's not canon, it's not right, you can't listen to it, it's all nonsense. It's kind of, maybe I would be inclined to believe that if it wasn't corroborated by every other myth all over the earth. Why should we discredit this one, which has heavy ties to our biblical perspective?
Well, it's canon depending on where you go. In Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch is canon, and other apocryphal books, right? They have 80 books in their Bible. So now the question is, who has the right Bible? Who has the correct, canon? Is it the West? Is it Protestantism? Or is it the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which has 80 books in their Bible? So the argument of it's not canon, or if it is canon, people on the other side of the world have a different canon than us. So how can you, check to see what canon holds up to the truth, basically? Is it your canon, or is it
you gotta just test all things with the Spirit, really, and
the Bible
actually can do. Yeah, it's nothing she can do. And the thing is, it's not a salvation issue.
No, it's not.
But people get so hung up on the biblical truth, and the Bible's infallible, and it's the true word of God attitude, and therefore it cannot be the sons of Nephilim. They are the sons of Seth, blah, blah, whatever you want to say. It's kind of yes and no. You know what I mean? I'm not saying the Bible is infallible. I'm not saying I don't, but you can go outside of the Bible to find texts that back up the story and add context to what the Bible's trying to say.
Because there's history that backs up the Bible, like the flood myths, right? It's not in the Bible, but it backs up what it says. And that's why we can use other histories. Exactly. And it makes perfect sense, yeah.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm 20,000 words into this book. I'm angling for maybe it's probably take me till the next year to get it finished. If I can keep this momentum going with the way it is. If you want to support the book, I have a GoFundMe. You can find it by just typing in the Nephilim Look Like Clowns GoFundMe, and I'll be there. If you donate £100 or more, so that's $125, I think, at the recent conversion rate, I will send you a signed copy of the book.
There we go.
Personally, I will send that to you personally if you donate that much. The money goes towards publishing costs, but also goes towards supporting me and my family while I'm doing this and taking time out of work, to write this book. But I'm having fun doing it.
I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, man. Good to see you again.